We're on page 5 of the other handout now. The handout that says Daniel 8 has Daniel 8, 1 through 27. And what I actually want to do is read through the first 21 verses, at least. But yeah, I'll read through 22 verses. And let me tell you why I'm going to do this. Okay, so, and before I read it, I want you to notice the very familiar graphic that I've given to you at least a half on page 7. I've given to you at least a half a dozen times since we've done Daniel 7. So when we first started Daniel 1, one of the burdens that I felt was, how do I help people really understand? Because that graph there, that graphic, is really the book of all of the prophetic eschatology. All of that in the book of Daniel is in that graphic. And it's been a burden for me to explain, how do you put that together? Because I look at it, I see it. Well, last week I'm going for my prayer walk, and it just hit me. There's 2 verses in the book of Daniel. 2. That's it. That those 2 verses are the key to be able to understand that graph. Literally, I'm just out for a prayer walk and became evident to me, oh, it's just those 2 verses. So if you get those 2, and we're going to look at those today, if you get those 2 verses, you can put that chart together. And if you don't get those 2 verses, no matter what you do, you'll always be confused by that graph. Does that make sense? And my hope, my goal is that you'll see that. And if you have a Bible with you, an actual Bible, I actually would put a square or a highlight or a box or something around Daniel 8, verses 20 and 21, because those are the key verses to be able to really get, how do you know those are the nations that Daniel talks about throughout the book? How do you know it? It's in those 2 verses. So here we go. Daniel 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me. To me! So in other words, he's just announced, people have been telling my story for me in the first 7 chapters, but now I'm going to speak. Okay, I'm speaking now. To me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened that while I was looking, that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. And then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will, and he became great. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west, across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, and attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. It's obvious there's this battle going on, this struggle between a ram and the goat. Verse 8. Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. And it grew up toward the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host, and some of the stars to the ground, and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, because of the transgression. An army was given over to the horn, to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Then it happened, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, then suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand this vision. So he came near where I stood. And when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Now when he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and stood me upright. And he said, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appointed time the end shall be. The ram which you saw having two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia, and the male goat is the king of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of the nation, but not with its power. Okay, so we looked at going to page 3, about 60% of the way down the page. 150 years before Cyrus was born, Isaiah prophesied Cyrus by name in 700 BC. He names him by name. And there's the passage where he does it. Going over to page 4. We know that God knows the future. And I've explained that in here many times before. He knows the future. And on the rest of page 4, we looked last week at some of the people that God obviously knew before they were born, before he created anything. Okay? He knew these people. If Jesus Christ was crucified from the foundations of the world, right, that means that God knew that Jesus was going to go to the cross before he said, let there be light. If he knew that, then he knew Jesus' identity as a human being. Isn't that kind of obvious? Which means he knew that he would be an Israelite. If Jesus Christ exists from the foundations of the world, then Am Israel Chai, Israel exists from the foundations of the world. Has to be. And in the new heaven, there will be the gates around the New Jerusalem, and there'll be 12 gates with the 12 names of the tribes of Israel. Replacement theology denies the new heaven, because the new heaven will have the names of the 12 tribes of Israel on it. And they're not even on the current heaven. So, in other words, Israel, Am Israel Chai, before there was time, Am Israel Chai, after time is over. There's no way to avoid this. So now we're on page 5. If God knew Cyrus 150 years before he was born, we did half of this page, but I'll repeat it. If God knew Jacob from the foundations of the world, if God knew Jeremiah before he was born and conceived in the womb, if God was there knitting David together in the womb in Psalm 139, if God knew everyone's name who was not written in the Lamb's book of life from the creation of the world in Revelation 13:8, doesn't it make sense that God knew the names of those who were written in the book of life from the foundations of the world? Does it not also make sense that God was there knitting you together while you were in the womb? Romans 8:29, for those whom God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. So because God already knew that you would be written in the book of life, He knew. He did not make you choose Jesus. We spent a lot of time on this last time. He did not make you choose Jesus. He just knew. And all of your decision to accept him or reject him is entirely on you, and you get all the consequences of that. No matter what. The Pharaoh could not say, "You're responsible for me." Judas could not say, "You're responsible." Free will matters. Somebody asked me last week, am I an Arminianist or a Calvinist? I think those are both man-made theological systems, and therefore the answer is I'm both and neither. I believe every single thing that could possibly ever happen, the slightest movement of an electron around a molecule or an atom, God knows. Everything. 1 billion years from now. And everything you and I do, we are fully responsible for. And our individual free will in no way diminishes his absolute sovereignty over everything. And his absolute sovereignty over everything in no way diminishes our absolute free will with all of its consequences. We think those things are in contradiction because we have puny minds. He doesn't. He's so big, he can give full control, or rather give full freedom of will with all of the consequences and still maintain total control. He's that big. He never loses control over anything. An illustration I used in here a couple of years ago, probably when I was talking about Psalms, take a lake and drop a pebble on it, a perfectly still lake, and you'll get ripples. And if you're a really good physicist, you could describe the ripples and how they're going out, the speed and the height of the ripple. Well, don't drop one pebble, drop two. You'd have to be a phenomenal physicist, but you could just do that with the ripples. But now have a hailstorm. And you've got 20 billion hailstones hitting the lake at the same time. And God knows the details of every ripple and how long they'll last. And there's not even hard for him. He doesn't have to calculate it because he just knows it. He just knows it. God is that big. Okay, so not only on that page, not only did God make Cyrus, but he also foretold that Cyrus would be the one who would allow the city of Jerusalem and the temple to be rebuilt. Isaiah 44:26. That's 2 pages earlier. Similarly, God knew Cyrus's purpose. Likewise, God knew Jeremiah's call to be a prophet before he was born. According to the NIV Study Bible note on Ezra 1:1, Cyrus issued the order to rebuild the temple in 538 BC, which agrees with what Walvoord said, the Baptist theologian, back on page 3, which I won't read, but at that, there's a little quote about from John Walvoord, and it says it's 12 years before the feast. Okay, now this is new. Last time, we showed that the vision of Daniel, chapter 8, happened 12 years before Cyrus ordered the temple rebuilt. And Isaiah predicted it about 150 years before it happened. God is at work in our situations then, before we even know that any need will arise. He already knows. And those whom he foreknew, he foreordained that they would be formed into the image of his Son. He knew what you would do with Jesus. So he's been working at forming you into the image of his Son before you were even born, because he knew you would. He didn't make you. He didn't make you, but he knew you would. Okay, so a vision appeared to me, Daniel, chapter 8, verse 1. We're still in verse 1. After the one that appeared to me a few the first time. Daniel 8:1. This can't be the vision of Daniel chapter 2. Why not? Because that dream or vision was Nebuchadnezzar's dream or vision. All Daniel did with it was interpret it. So Daniel is saying here, after the one that appeared to me the first time. The only one that could be out of this book is Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has a dream, a vision. Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions of his head were on his head. And then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel chapter 8, one chapter later, verse 1. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. That must be referring to Daniel 7:1. The word for vision in Daniel 7:1 and Daniel 8:1 is different. Why is it different? Because Daniel chapters 1 through chapter 2, verses 4, the first half of verse 4 is all in Hebrew. And then Daniel chapter 2, verse 4, the second half of the verse, up until the last verse of Daniel 7 is all in Aramaic. Was not written in Hebrew. It was written in Aramaic. But when you come to Daniel 8, verse 1, now you're back in Hebrew. So the word for vision is not the same word because it's a different language. But it's the same thing. It's a vision. And Daniel says, I had a vision after the first one. So the spiritual experience of Daniel chapter 8 is a follow-up experience to the experience of Daniel 7. The experience of Daniel 7 started as a dream. Daniel awoke, and then the dream continued as awake visions in his head. Like you wake up out of a dream and you're still seeing it with your eyes open. That's what happens to him. We looked at that in Daniel 7. The experience of Daniel 8, though, did not start as a dream. It started as a vision. This may not, but it may indicate that Daniel is growing in his ability to hear from God. However, to be fair, Daniel 2:19 says that the meaning of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue in Daniel 2 did come to Daniel through a night vision. So maybe it doesn't imply that. Going over to page 6. But the vision of chapter 8 is clearly built on the vision of chapter 7. And the experience of Daniel 7 started as a dream, while the experience of Daniel 8 starts as an open vision. In chapter 7, the vision is about 4 kingdoms. And if there they listed Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, Greece, and Rome, and the 4 animals, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the terrifying and frightening unnamed beast. If we'll come right back to page 6, you can see that graph on page 7. On the left column, you've got the vision that Nebuchadnezzar has of the statue, the gold statue. Gold head, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron. In chapter 7, we're given the names of these animals, and there are 4 animals. Okay? The lion, the bear, the leopard, and the terrifying and frightening beast. In other words, it's not likened to a specific animal. Going back to page 6. In chapter 8, the vision focuses on only 2 of those kingdoms. So this vision now is more detailed. It is a progressive revelation. Peter says we're established by present truth. God gives us progressive revelation. Daniel 8:20 plainly tells us that the first kingdom, the ram, and the goat are mentioned in all those verses before, but we're jumping ahead to verses 20 and 21 now, so that as we go back in our later classes to the first part of the chapter, now you're going to know the nations the kingdoms we're talking about, because we did this, because we jumped ahead. Okay, so Daniel 8, the vision focuses on only 2 of those kingdoms. So it's more detailed. It's progressive revelation. Daniel 8:20 tells us that the first kingdom, the ram, is the Medo-Persian Empire. Daniel 8:21 plainly tells us that the second kingdom, the goat, is Greece. So Daniel chapter 8 telescopes in on the middle two kingdoms of Daniel chapter 7. Look at verses 20 and 21 here. The ram which you saw having two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So when we go back and start to look at the first part of this chapter, as we get past verse 1, we're going to know who we're talking about. Because when it talks about the ram, the two horns, the Medes and the Persians. That's that kingdom. Verse 21. And the male goat in all of those verses is going to be the kingdom of Greece. And the large horn that's between its eyes is the first king of Greece. Okay, these three bullets are just, the rest of this page is the key now. Are you all with me so far? Like I'm going real slow, but I think it helps to get it. Okay, so Daniel 8:21 is the first of three times that Daniel mentions Greece. Those are the verses. Based on Daniel 8, we were able to read back to Daniel 2 and 7. And that allowed us to understand that the third kingdom is Greece. Now, we just said it when we were back in an earlier readings, that the third kingdom was Greece, and we saw it like on that graph. But this is how you do it. This is how you end up with that being Greece. Okay? The Medes and the Persians were both mentioned together earlier in Daniel 5:28, 6:8, 6:12, 6:15, 6:28. Additionally, the Medes were also mentioned three other times. I said with mention. Actually, I should have said without mention of Persia. In other words, those last three times, Daniel 5:31, 9:1, and 11:1, are all times when the Medes are mentioned without mentioning Persia. Because of the Medes and the Persians, there's two groups that come together to form one kingdom. I left out the word out there, okay? Y'all with me still? Okay. It really helps the students of prophetic history that Daniel identifies Greece and the Medo-Persian Empire. Not only does Daniel 8 mention Greece and the Medo-Persian empires, but he also specifies that the goat of Greece is the empire that conquers the ram of the Medo-Persians. Did you all see that? It is Greece that conquers the Medo-Persians. It is the goat that conquers the ram. Okay, Daniel chapter 8, verses 5 through 7, and I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth. And I'll just tell you, okay, that's Greece, and the single horn between its eyes is going to be Alexander the Great. It's actually, we're going to have to be able to name some of these people as we go through this. Okay, came from the west across the surface of the whole earth, and without touching the ground, it's picturing the speed with which Alexander the Great conquers the known world. He conquers the entire known world by the time he's 33 and then dies, lamenting that there's no place left to conquer. That's true history. Okay, and he does it with tremendous speed. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. That's Alexander. Then he came to the ram that had two horns. The two horns are the Medes and the Persians, a kingdom made up of two people groups, which I had seen standing beside the river, and the ram and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him and attacked the ram and broke his two horns. And there was no power in the ram, no power in the Medes and the Persians to withstand Greece. But he was cast down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Okay, one other key thing now to put it all together is this next thing here. Daniel 5:28 plainly identifies the Medes and the Persians as the empire that will conquer Babylon. Daniel 5:22 says, and by you his son Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, but you his son Belshazzar have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. And then he gives this handwriting on the wall. He reads the handwriting on the wall and he interprets it. And he says, Paris, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And that night, that chapter will end saying, that night Belshazzar dies. So we've got Babylon. Belshazzar is the king. We have Babylon. He's conquered by the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians are going to be conquered by Greece. So the goat is going to conquer the ram, who's going to conquer the lion. So now what we have is we clearly have the first three nations of Daniel's eschatological prophecy all just fall right in place. You can't put that together without Daniel 8, verses 20 and 21. Those two verses, just along with Daniel 5, verse 28, they just lay it out. So now all of a sudden we know, we can understand that graph. Does anybody want to ask about this? That graph just falls right in place. Can you see it? So, and that's why I said I would just draw a box or a highlight or something in your Bible on those two verses, because you won't always have me with you, and you won't always have these notes with you, right? But that's why I like to mark my Bibles. I'm a lover of the Bible. I have noticed this. I just went through a great prophetic presbytery thing. You know, none of you saw that. I'm going to tell you the honest truth. I loved it. It's fantastic. Awesome words. But I can tell you my own experience. I've had awesome words like that and even more awesome over my life. I don't always remember the prophetic words. But this is true. When I'm reading the Bible and God speaks to me while I'm reading the Bible, and 10 years later I read that verse of Scripture, I'm going to remember what the Lord said to me. That I will never forget. What he said to me when I was reading the Bible. That's why I would mark a Bible. And some of you know what I'm talking. Anybody else have that testimony? It's just, you'll never forget it. But prophecies, what do they tell you? Write them down so you'll remember them. I read the Bible, I'm going to remember it. It's coming back to me when I read the Bible. All right. So page 7. The rest of the time we have, which isn't going to be that long, we're just going to talk about God trains his people to hear his voice. And that's really what just happened with Daniel. He had a first dream, spiritual encounter, and then he has another. And it's built upon the first. So God trains his people to hear his voice. Sometimes the training is uncomfortable. And God often reveals things, revelation upon revelation, line upon line. Mark 4. For there is nothing hidden which shall not be revealed, nor has anything been kept secret but that it should come to light. If anyone has ears, let him hear. Then he said to them, take heed what you hear. With the same measure you use, it will be measured to you, and to you who hear, more will be given. If you try to grow in hearing God's voice, you will grow. That's what he's saying. For whoever has, to him more will be given, but whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. That thought in verse 22 is found in Luke 8:17. It's found in Mark 4:22. It's found in the Synoptic Gospels. You find similar thoughts in John, but that exact thought is in all three Synoptic Gospels. I like the way the last verse of Ecclesiastes says this, Ecclesiastes 12:14. God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. We like to think that some works are not going to be remembered on Judgment Day. It's all under the blood. No, no, no. Every work will be remembered on Judgment Day. If for no other reason, so that you can give God glory for forgiveness. Everything will be remembered on Judgment Day. What we do really matters. Isaiah 28. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. For with stammering lips and another tongue he will speak to his people. Paul will quote this, that verse right there, in 1 Corinthians 14:21. And he will say, in the law it says, with stammering lips and another tongue. It's interesting because it's not in the Torah, so Paul calls Isaiah 28 the Torah. The word Torah is not only like we like in our Christian world to have these nice little, nice little boxes. God's got sovereignty, and his sovereignty doesn't allow me to have free will over here, and we have my nice little boxes. And of course, they mean nothing to him. Nothing at all. Like they just don't, because he lives in a different reality. We are responsible. You cannot get away from our responsibility. Okay, so we're responsible to do our best to hear from him. And Paul will use that verse there to train the people about speaking in tongues. That's what he's doing. The context of Isaiah 28 is that Israel has been in sin. They're not listening to him. And God says, because you're not listening to me, I'm going to send the Assyrians to you, and they're going to speak in this foreign language. It's going to sound like gerbil to you, and you won't understand a word that they're saying to you. And Paul will use, and it's actually going to be like a form of judgment upon Israel, Tisha B'Av, as you will, when the Assyrians do this. And Paul is using that to explain tongues. And that's why he'll go here. All right, at the bottom of the page. We need to give priority to hearing from God. But we need to recognize that there are times when God is quieter. During those times, God calls us to live in obedience to his written word and to the last word that he gave us. For example, God told Joseph to take Mary and the baby Jesus to Egypt. And as far as we know, he says nothing else to Joseph for 2 years. Nothing. This is the Holy Family. Nothing. And the next thing you know, he says, okay, now the one who's going to kill him is dead, so you can go back. Going over to page 8. There are times when God is conspicuously quieter in our lives. This is reality. I know we spirit-filled people, we want to deny this truth, but it's truth. I've had times in my life when he's quiet. I wish he weren't. But there are times like that. And during those times, we are called to demonstrate our faithfulness to him. And that is the test of Job. And he passed the test. In his humanity, Jesus learned. We have this idea that he knew everything because he's God, but he laid aside his omniscience to know everything. He laid it aside. For example, no man knows the day of his coming. Only the Father, not even the Son of Man. But I guarantee you that he knows now. He's got 7 eyes, meaning perfect vision, sitting on the throne in heaven. He knows everything now. He's God. He laid aside his omnipotence, all his power. He was able to die. He laid aside his omnipresence, his ability to be everywhere at the same time. He could only be in that human body. He is omnipresent now. He is omnipotent now. And he is omniscient now. He wasn't when he was on the earth. So in his humanity, Jesus learned. Luke 1 verse 80. So the child grew and became strong in spirit. Well, that means that his spirit was getting stronger. How can he become strong in spirit if his spirit already had all strength? So his spirit did not have all strength. even though he was fully divine. See that? Luke 2:40, I love this verse. And the child grew and became strong in spirit. So he was not all strength. And in fact, he does not say all power is given unto me until he rises from the dead and ascends to heaven. And he was filled with wisdom. That means that he was not filled with wisdom before he became fuller and fuller with wisdom. Can you see that? And the grace of God was upon him. So this idea of growing in wisdom, as I've looked at this for a few moments, I'll just camp on that for just a moment. Jesus grew in his mental ability. That's what that's telling us. There's different words for, in Greek, that's Luke, different words for wisdom. There's a word, gnosis, which means just knowledge by itself. Like I could know that that's a chair, to know something. I could know your name, to know something. Okay, and then there's another word, which synesis, which means to know the significance of something. And then there's another word, phronesis, which means to know the practical wisdom of something. That's practical. There are people who think every sermon's got to be practical. Let me tell you, God does not think so. You think so. I'll give you 20 examples if we have time. That's just not true. Everything doesn't have to be practical. It just doesn't. I just need to love my wife, period. I just need to love the Lord, period. I just need to, there's things I just need to do. Right? Be. I just have to be it. But then this word for wisdom here is Sophia. And you can imagine, you know that word, Sophia. It actually means wisdom that is exhibited in action. So what he's doing is he's being filled by living out a life, wisdom that is exhibited in action. He's demonstrating, he's living it, works, if you will. He's doing it. He's doing it. There's this, I was really thinking about this today. Between the 16th and the 19th century, because when I studied counseling many years ago, there was something, the world believed in something called a homunculus, homunculus, but homunculus. Homonculus. You can see the word human there. And the thought of it was, this is what the world believed. A baby in a womb, from the moment of conception, was a microscopic human being, exactly the same, just smaller. And that is provably wrong. It's just not true. That doesn't mean it's not a human being, but it's not the same as a man. It's different. A 2-month-old baby is not the same as a man. And to not recognize the difference is just error, total error. Okay? So for centuries, humanity thought that babies had all of the same intellectual wisdom, all of the same intellectual abilities as an adult. Can I tell you, you could train a 2-month-old baby algebra for the next 6 years, and they're going to get nothing. There's no chance they're going to get it. Because the human brain molecularly develops, synapses form, and the human brain is not capable of understanding some things. I got 3 minutes to stop. This is my reminder. It's just not capable to stop, to learn some things. Jesus grew in wisdom. He grew in his ability to gain information and to use it. He's 12 years old, basically the age of a bar mitzvah, and he's in the temple. Did you not know I must be about my Father's business? He had an awakening. Can you imagine what that moment would have been like for him to realize, I really am God? And I'm not crazy. If you think that, you really are crazy. And I would be too. And there's all kinds of, you could study, the Piaget is an interesting guy to read about. He talked about stages of cognitive development. So there's ways, Jesus grew in 4 ways. He grew physically. I'll go to the end of this page. He grew physically, he grew spiritually, he grew mentally, and he grew in grace. And the fact that, see, grace was upon him. Now, the grace of God is slightly different from grace with God. Okay, grace, charis, the Greek word is the root of the word charisma for the gifts of God, because the gifts are the charis, the graces of God. And it brought God the Father increasing joy to watch his Son living among people. Look how he's exhibiting this at his water baptism. This is my beloved Son. Man, I'm proud of this guy. Look what he just did. That's what happened there. So in this context, to grow in grace implies this idea of growing socially among human beings and how you're living among people. Jesus grew intellectually, he grew spiritually, he grew socially, and he grew in grace. We think that grace is unmerited favor. How can that definition work if grace is on Jesus? If it's on him, how can it be unmerited favor? You see the point? It's not unmerited favor. Oh, yes, it is. But that's a totally inadequate definition because it's on him. If it's on him, that doesn't work. It's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be more. Okay? Ephesians 2:8. For by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared that we should walk in them. Saved by grace through faith. He does this in our lives, and we're saved. And then grace then requires that we act on it. He wants us to act. It's like the illustration I used last November. You like a painter comes to your house, you like him, and you hire him, and you pay him the entire bill, and expect him to show up on Monday to paint your house. And he decides, I got all the money, I'm not going to show up. But do people do that to God? Right? That doesn't work with God. You would be angry at that painter. Right? Okay, so here's where I go with what is grace. Grace is the smile of God. That's literally how I define in my theology, in my mind. That's what it is. It's God's smile. And he is smiling at you. It's this ministry of reconciliation. And for the unsaved, yeah. You know, saved by grace through faith. The unmerited favor, but for the saved who's living for him, he's smiling on you. It's Jesus getting baptized. This is my beloved Son. It's the smile. And where do I see this? I see it in the Aaronic benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. See, the blessing you and keeping you go together. And then the face shining on you and being gracious to you go together. And the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace, shalom, give you everything you need because he's looking right at you. There's how you say it in English. Some of you, Yivarechecha Adonai. It doesn't say Adonai, as you can see, but that's because Jewish people don't say that word. I don't have a problem with the church using that word in a worship song in a sanctuary. But if we did it in a Jewish setting, the Jewish people in the room who don't know Jesus will spend the rest of that service not worshiping God. The entire rest of the time, they will wonder, is it okay they just did that? And they will also feel dishonored because we don't use that word. You see the point? And so we just don't use that word. Like, I know I have used it in teaching it at times. Dr. Rudolph has never spoken that word in his life. He visited us one time in here, and someone else used it, and he spoke to me afterwards. We just don't say that word. Okay? Adonai is fine. But that word, that word, so when we see that word, we don't say that word, we say the word Adonai. Because in Ezekiel, several times God says, I'm sending you into exile because you've dishonored my name. So the Jewish response to that is, we're going to honor his name. And that's when the tradition started. The only time the name is spoken is on Yom Kippur by the high priest in the Holy of Holies.
Pharaoh, that's my name.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I'm talking about Jewish culture, right? Jewish culture, how Jewish people will respond. Do you want Jewish people to be attracted or turned off? That's what I'm addressing here. Okay? So, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha Ya'er Adonai panav alecha v'hunecha Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yesem lecha shalom. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. So you can see in this passage that God is actually saying that I want you to tell the people that my grace is going to be on them because I'm smiling on them. And that's why, for me, grace, I don't have a problem with saying it's unmerited favor. I just think it's an inadequate definition. It just doesn't work because it's on Jesus. So I go with, it's the smile of God. Isn't that beautiful? Makes you want to smile, doesn't it? I'll close with a funny, not a funny, but an illustration that I've used when training people on how to preach. And then, are you coming up, Greg? Let me just close with this thought. If I were training a young person on how to, or anybody, on how to speak to people, I would tell them, and I picked this up because of some things that were said way back when I was in seminary in the early 90s. I want you to imagine that I were to get up in front of the sanctuary at a Shabbat service, and I didn't say a word, and for 30 seconds, all I did was frown. I can't even do it now because of my mood, okay? But if all I did was frown for 30 seconds, what would be the impact on the people? I don't say a word. What would be the impact on the people? What's wrong with this guy? What's going on here? Change the scenario. I walk out, I don't say a word, and all I do is put the biggest grin on that I can possibly put on for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. What's going to be happening in that room within 30 seconds? You're going to hear people laughing. The power of a smile. Smile. It'll change your heart.